Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth debate of term and the final one before the start of quiet period next Wednesday. So the motion before us tonight is that this House regrets the West's approach to Russia, and it comes at a really poignant time. And we're honoured today to be joined by some wonderful guests, some here in person, one here virtually, because of the current conflict and the fact that he cannot leave Russia due to his status as a dissident. So proposing the motion tonight, Dominic Grieve, KC, is joined by Russian dissident leader Grigory Yavlinsky and student speaker Javier Singh. Meanwhile, in opposition of the motion, Elisabeth Braw is joined by Senator Seery Kearney and student speaker Linus Pash. Could we please give a warm welcome to all of our speakers tonight? Mr. Yavlinsky is a Russian economist and politician. He held senior positions in the governments of the USSR and Russia, and he is the initiator and author of the 500 Days program of market economic reforms. He's also the leader of the opposition Democratic Party, Yabloko, and he ran for president of Russia in 1996 and in 2000. Mr. Yavlinsky is a principled opponent of Putin, and he is joining us virtually. Mr. Yavlinsky, you have the floor.
Thank you. I hope you hear me. So it's very difficult for me to understand whether you hear me or not. But I will try to do my best. First of all, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to speak to such a distinguished audience with such distinguished speakers. I appreciate Dominic Grieve's courageous and principled stance on many issues in British politics. I share the fears of which Elisabeth Braw writes in her articles, which are very interesting very often. I thank Seery Kearney for their work she does on behalf of women and children feeling the atrocities of war. Especially, I'm grateful to Cambridge for being about the only platform that has challenged the mistakes of the world politics. Students who see the problem and have the bravery to go sometimes against public opinion, that is encouraging. I'm speaking to you in the university of the country which have hundreds and hundreds years of democracy from the country which have democracy several years only in its history. So this House regrets the West's approach to Russia. That's a rare, if not unique, reflection for today's world's politics. We can only dream about more thoughtful, strategic, and experienced approach. In my opinion, the main problem is not whether the West relations with Russia should have been tougher or sweeter. The problem is that they should have been much more smart, wise, honest, and responsible. But before I get to the point of today's conversation, I want to express my personal position and my party's position on what is happening. My party and I personally consider everything that is happening to be an incredible tragedy and have been insisting on ceasefire in all forms since day one. We are talking about this loudly and publicly throughout the country. My speech today is not about shifting the responsibility, but according to the topic of discussion, I'm going to take a broader picture. The world is changing. A new world disorder is coming. This is not about Eastern Europe only, but also the Middle East, Taiwan, and the serious global fragmentation of the economy, deglobalization. This is, of course, a very big topic, and I will not be able to say about all this but I would like to note, what about the role of the West? Why is this happening? Why the circumstances of the war between the United States and allies in Iraq and Afghanistan, or Libya and Syria, were so unfortunate? I'm not bringing up, on my opinion, the drama, on my opinion, of Brexit, which you know better than I and better than whoever else. Today we are talking about the West influence on the situation with Russia. Once again, almost all responsibility lies with Russia. We are now talking about the West and its role in what Russia is like today. In these notes, I will limit myself to some of the aspects which played a key role over the past 30 years in the development of the situation of today. First point is the failure of the reforms of the 90s under the leadership of the West. The West, the USA and the European Union has made a sizable contribution to the creation, design and consolidation of the Russian, I'm sorry to say, oligarchic system, and played a significant role in pushing us to the current situation. I'll tell you only several points. In 1991-1992, American establishment obstructed the implementation of economic reform plan in Russia. It was replaced by so-called the Washington Consensus and IMF recommendations, which was entirely wrong in Russian conditions, whose main results were hyperinflation. Can you imagine? 2,600% a year in 1992, and criminal privatization, terrible criminal privatization in 1995. So that was the fundamental reasons that in Russia appears not a democratic state, but the oligarchic, corporate, mafiosi state. Mass lending to Russia by the IMF during the war in North Caucasus and widespread military crimes committed by the Russian army in Chechnya. The money was coming. Frank and unlimited support for Boris Yeltsin at the presidential elections, despite all the violations and falsifications at the start of the destruction of independent mass media in Russia. After that, Vladimir Putin became the president of Russia with the unconditional and full support of the West. Outright and unconditional support of the West for Vladimir Putin in the presidential elections, the participation of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Tony Blair, in Putin's election campaign, and blatant lobbying for him. Russian military actions at the same time, and the carpet bombing of Chechnya in 1999-2000 did not stop the IMF's lending and support. For many years, the West proactively supported Putin at a personal level. Tony Blair, George Bush Jr., Berlusconi, Prodi, Sarkozy, Kurz, Tsipras, Macron. The topic of the West's influence on what happened to Russia is material and merits a detailed examination. However, even in that situation, there were attempts to find a common language with the West. The deterioration in relations between Russia and the West over the past 15 years is not due to the much hyped eastern expansion of NATO. The key problem was that ever since the start of the 90s, the West has not developed and has not proposed a new collective security system in line with the times, which would include Russia. Were there any attempts to come to a mutual understanding? There were. However, they were not marked by conviction on the part of the Western partners. I refer here, for some example, to the joint anti-missile defense system for Europe, Russia, European Union, and the United States. In 2001, Putin discussed this issue and negotiations with Secretary General of NATO, George Robertson, during his visit to Russia. But no further developments happened. More than that, a joint declaration on new strategic relations between Russia and the United States, President Bush, was signed in Moscow in May 2002, but not a single practical step was taken to implement it. I'm talking about this because I personally initiated and participated in preparation of these projects. I must be said that anti-missile system, was a project of colossal proportions worth billions of euros, which would forever link Russia and Europe. The United States didn't want this connection. The lack of initiatives of Russian-European integration in security is attributable first and foremost to the lack of understanding of the significance of this process. The strategy of a greater Europe and Russia-European integration was not actually discussed seriously. As a result, instead of the strategical vital path of the rapprochement of Russia and Europe, misunderstanding of political agenda was formed. As a result, what happened? Corporate, oligarchic, semi-criminal economic system destroyed the political one given by Gorbachev. I wouldn't go into the details now about liquidation of the private television channels, nationalization of mass media, campaign for depolitization of the country, and so on. All that period of time, Putin was a member of G8, and nobody in the West is ready to see the reality until the 2014. But it was too late. Russia not only was no longer a democracy, but it was rapidly moving in the opposite direction. However, 2 last decades became a time of loss and degradation, and it concerns not only relations with our country. Donald Trump's politics and storm of Washington Capitol on 6th of January 2021 are due to the same range of symptoms. Incidentally, for 30 years, the West has also failed to notice in Ukraine the prospects for a greater Europe. Even after the annexation of Crimea and the start of the war in Donbass in 2014, nothing was created for Ukraine like, for example, the Marshall Plan. No timely and real steps were taken for Ukraine's integration into the European Union. Only now the West starts to consider more or less.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yavlinsky, for that speech.